You know what makes me a little sad every summer? I see people looking at empty garden beds in late June and saying the same thing. I missed my chance this year. Nothing is worth planting now. If you've ever thought that yourself, you're throwing away weeks of perfect growing weather without even realizing it. The biggest mistake isn't planting too late. The biggest mistake is believing the calendar matters more than the conditions right outside your door. I've been gardening long enough to watch people rush seeds into cold spring soil because everyone says May is the right time. Then those same seeds sit there, rot, or struggle for weeks while someone who waited until the soil was truly warm ends up harvesting healthier plants with less effort. That's why I want to show you something many gardeners discover only after years of trial and error. The season isn't over when June arrives. In many cases, it's only getting easier. Over the next few minutes, I'll walk you through the vegetables and herbs I still sow directly into the ground in late June and even July. I'll explain why some crops actually perform better than they do in spring, which ones you should avoid because summer heat works against them, and what simple habits help young seedlings grow quickly without spending money on fancy products. None of this is complicated. Most of it was shown to me years ago by people who never rushed because they watched the soil instead of the calendar. Once I started doing the same, I stopped worrying every time spring plans changed or bad weather delayed my work. Now, if I see empty space in the garden at the beginning of summer, I don't see failure anymore. I see opportunity. And before we talk about the first vegetables that still have plenty of time to reward you, there's one old belief we need to leave behind because it quietly ruins more harvests than most people ever realize. For years, I believed what almost everyone around me believed. If the seeds weren't in the ground by May, I had already fallen behind. Then, one season, we had a long, cold spring. The nights stayed chilly, the soil stayed cold, and every early planting seemed to struggle. Some seeds never came up at all, while others took so long that weeds got a head start. A few weeks later, I had some empty spaces left in the garden, so I planted them almost out of stubbornness. I wasn't expecting much, but those later seeds surprised me. They came up faster, looked stronger from the very beginning, and soon they were catching up with, and sometimes passing, the plants I had started weeks earlier. That was the moment I stopped trusting dates printed on seed packets more than what I could actually see and feel in my own garden. Plants don't own a calendar. They don't know if it's the middle of May or the beginning of July. What they respond to is warm soil, long daylight, steady temperatures, and enough moisture to wake the seed and keep it growing. When those conditions are finally right, many vegetables almost seem impatient to get started. Instead of sitting underground waiting for warmth, they sprout quickly and begin building healthy roots almost immediately. That early strength makes a bigger difference than planting 2 or 3 weeks sooner into poor conditions. Most gardeners never think about it this way because we've all heard the same advice repeated year after year. Plant early. Get everything done before summer. But gardening has always rewarded observation more than habit. I still remember an older neighbor telling me many years ago that he watched the ground before he watched the calendar. At the time, I smiled politely, but now I understand exactly what he meant. The soil is always telling you whether it's ready. Once you begin paying attention to that instead of the date, gardening becomes much less stressful. You stop feeling like you failed because life got busy or the weather refused to cooperate. And once you realize that, a whole list of vegetables suddenly becomes possible again, including one that many people mistakenly believe is only worth planting in spring. Let's start with cucumbers because this is the crop that surprises people the most. Every year, someone tells me it's already too late, and every year I smile because I've watched summer-sown cucumbers grow faster than the ones I planted in spring. Think about what cucumber seeds really want. They love warm soil. They enjoy long sunny days. They dislike sitting in cold, wet ground waiting for the weather to improve. When you sow them in late June or early July, the conditions are often exactly what they have been waiting for. I've seen seeds emerge in just a few days while the spring planting took nearly 2 weeks. The same idea applies to zucchini, patty pan squash, pumpkins, melons, and even watermelons if your growing season is long enough. These plants are naturally built for warmth. Once the soil has fully warmed, they don't waste time. They push strong roots into the ground. Their leaves expand quickly, and before long they begin flowering without ever experiencing the stress that cold spring nights can cause. Another crop I never hesitate to sow in summer is beans. Bush beans especially seem to enjoy the stable weather. Instead of struggling through cold mornings, they come up evenly and begin growing with confidence. Basil is another favorite of mine because it absolutely loves warm conditions. Many people rush to plant it too early, only to watch it sit almost motionless while cool weather holds it back. Plant it into warm summer soil, and it often rewards you with lush, fragrant growth that seems to double every week. Dill, cilantro, and parsley can also be sown again, giving you fresh herbs long after the first spring planting has started to flower or lose quality. I like having young herbs growing while the older ones begin slowing down, because it keeps the kitchen supplied without spending a single dollar at the grocery store. Most people never take advantage of this second opportunity simply because they've convinced themselves the season has already passed. But the garden doesn't think that way. If the conditions are right, it keeps offering another chance. And there are still several vegetables that many people assume are impossible to sow this late, even though they often become some of the most satisfying harvests of the entire year. Now let me tell you about another group of vegetables that people often cross off their list far too early: carrots, beets, and cabbage. I hear all the time that these should only be planted in spring, but my experience has taught me something different. Summer sowing can actually solve several problems that spring planting creates. When carrot seeds go into warm, moist soil, they usually germinate much faster than they do in chilly ground. They spend less time vulnerable to rot and often produce a much more even stand. Beets behave in a similar way. Once they get a steady supply of warmth and moisture, they establish themselves quickly and build strong roots without the slow, uneven start that cold weather often causes. If you're thinking ahead to storing vegetables for winter, this timing can work especially well because the roots mature as the weather gradually cools, helping them stay firm and flavorful. Cabbage is another crop many gardeners overlook during summer, especially varieties intended for autumn harvest. Instead of battling cold spring winds and repeated temperature swings, young cabbage plants settle into warm soil and begin growing without that early stress. One lesson I learned years ago is that direct sowing can sometimes be kinder to the plant than raising seedlings indoors. There is no transplant shock, no damaged roots, and no long recovery period. The seed wakes up exactly where it will spend its entire life, and that simple fact often leads to stronger growth than people expect. Of course, this doesn't mean every crop belongs in the summer garden. In fact, this is where many gardeners make another common mistake. They continue sowing exactly the same vegetables they enjoyed in spring, and then wonder why the results are disappointing. Lettuce, spinach, radishes, and arugula usually struggle during the hottest part of summer. The long days and high temperatures encourage them to bolt very quickly. Instead of producing tender leaves or crisp roots, they rush to flower, become tough, and often develop a bitter taste. It isn't because you've done something wrong. It's simply how these plants respond to heat and long daylight. Knowing which crops enjoy summer and which ones fight against it saves time, seeds, and disappointment. But even when you've chosen the right vegetables, there are a few simple habits that make the difference between average results and a garden that fills those empty beds with healthy, vigorous growth. This is the part where I see most people make a mistake, and it has nothing to do with choosing the wrong seeds. They plant at the right time, pick the right vegetables, and then treat a summer planting exactly like a spring one. That rarely ends well because the sun is stronger, the soil dries much faster, and young seedlings don't have deep roots yet. The first thing I always pay attention to is moisture. After sowing, I never let the top layer of soil dry into a hard crust. Seeds need consistent moisture while they are waking up, and if that thin surface dries repeatedly, germination becomes uneven. I would rather water gently and regularly than pour on a large amount once in a while. A slow watering in the early morning gives the soil time to absorb the moisture before the hottest part of the day arrives. Another habit that has saved me countless hours over the years is mulching. This isn't some expensive trick. Dry grass, clean straw, shredded leaves, or any simple natural mulch can make a remarkable difference. It keeps moisture in the soil longer, slows weed growth, and protects the ground from becoming hard after every hot afternoon. Someone showed me this many years ago, and I still smile every time I pull the mulch back and find cool, damp soil underneath, while the uncovered ground nearby is already dry. That one simple habit often means less watering, healthier roots, and much less work during the hottest weeks of summer. Weeds are another thing I never ignore in a fresh summer planting. When vegetables are young, weeds compete for every drop of water and every bit of nutrition. If you remove them while they are still small, the job takes only a few minutes. Wait another week, and suddenly you're fighting a much bigger battle. I also like to check the beds every evening for the first couple of weeks. Not because I expect problems, but because little issues are easy to fix when you notice them early. A dry spot, a few weeds, or a patch that needs another gentle watering can all be handled before they become serious. None of these habits are difficult, and none of them cost much money, but together they give summer-sown vegetables exactly what they need to grow quickly. And once those young plants begin filling the beds with healthy green leaves, you'll start seeing something that surprises almost everyone who thought they had already missed the season. One of the nicest things about planting in late June or July is the confidence it gives you. Instead of looking at empty beds and thinking you've wasted another season, you begin seeing every open space as another chance to grow something useful. I've had years when spring plans completely fell apart because of heavy rain, unexpected travel, or simply not having enough time. Years ago, that would have frustrated me, but now I know the garden doesn't punish you for being a few weeks late. In many cases, it rewards patience. I've watched summer cucumbers catch up to spring plantings in no time at all. I've harvested beans that seemed stronger from the very beginning because they never had to fight through cold nights. I've pulled beautiful carrots and beets in autumn that stored all winter because they matured under cooler fall weather instead of the heat of midsummer. Even fresh herbs like basil, parsley, dill, and cilantro have often given me a second harvest that lasted long after the first planting had faded away. That's one of the old lessons I still carry with me. Don't try to force nature to match your schedule. Work with the conditions that nature is giving you today. It usually turns out to be much easier than trying to fight against them. Another thing I appreciate about summer sowing is how simple it can be. There are no trays filling the windowsills, no worrying about transplant shock, and no rushing seedlings outside at exactly the right moment. You place the seed where it will grow, keep the soil moist, protect it with a little mulch, and let the warm weather do much of the work for you. Most people are surprised by how quickly the garden begins filling with healthy green growth once they stop believing they have already missed their opportunity. Every season reminds me that gardens are much more forgiving than people think. They don't expect perfection. They simply respond to good conditions and steady care. And once you experience one successful summer planting, it's very difficult to go back to believing that everything has to happen in May. There's one final thought I always like to leave people with because I think it's the most important lesson of all, and it completely changes the way you look at the gardening season from now on. If there's one thing I hope you remember after watching this, it's that an empty garden bed at the beginning of summer is not a sign that you've failed. It's an invitation to start again. I've learned over the years that gardening isn't about doing everything on the perfect date. It's about making the most of the conditions you have today. If the soil is warm, the days are long, and you're willing to spend a few minutes caring for young plants, you still have every reason to expect a rewarding harvest. Don't let an old gardening myth convince you that the season has slipped away. I've seen too many people give up while there was still plenty of time to grow cucumbers, zucchini, squash, beans, carrots, beets, cabbage, basil, dill, parsley, cilantro, and other dependable crops that thrive when summer is already here. Some of those harvests have even turned out better than the ones I rushed into cold spring soil. They germinated faster, grew without transplant shock, and developed into strong, healthy plants that needed less effort than I expected. That's why I never look at the calendar first anymore. I walk into the garden, touch the soil, look at the weather, and let those simple signs guide my decisions. It's an old way of thinking, but sometimes the old ways are still the most reliable. Gardening has always rewarded patience more than hurry. It rewards observation more than habit. And perhaps most of all, it rewards the people who are willing to try instead of assuming it's already too late. So, if you've been standing there looking at empty rows and wondering whether they're worth planting, my advice is simple. Pick up those seed packets, prepare the soil, give the seeds enough water, cover the ground with a little mulch, and let nature do what it has always done. A few weeks from now, those empty spaces may be full of healthy green plants, and by the end of the season, you'll be harvesting fresh vegetables instead of wishing you had started. That's one of the reasons I never call late June or July the end of the gardening season. For me, they're simply the beginning of another opportunity. And in my next video, I'll show you another old gardening habit that costs nothing, takes only a few minutes, and quietly helps vegetables stay healthier through the hottest weeks of summer.